Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, Gordo Gambles, and welcome back to their full card breakdown. This time for UFC Vegas, I don't even know anymore. 82, UFC Vegas 82. Let's just call it UFC Allen versus Craig, because that's what we have in our main event, and it is an absolute banger. Aside from that, though, we have 14 total bouts, 13, 12. I don't know. There's been a ton of cancellations. Either way, I am here to break down this every single fight from a DraftKings and a betting perspective. I waited till the last minute really to go out here and film, just because I know that there are some late notice replacements. I did my research on these new guys whose name I can't even pronounce. But at the end of the day, we have fights nonetheless, and I'll be here to break down everything I can. Make sure to like button down below, subscribe to the channel, check out DailyFanMMA, because that's where the rest of my premium content will be. In case any of these fights don't even materialize, it all should be timestamped down below. Feel free to ask any questions you may have. Check me out on Twitter at GamblesGordo. And finally, with all those plugs out of the way, let's do this. At the time of filming, this first matchup on Tapology is one of these short notice ones that I'm not even sure if they're happening. Not on UFC stats. I do have my research done nonetheless, and I do have a matchup that I do think is going to be decently fun. We have the 8-1 Christian Leroy Duncan versus the 11-8 Dennis Tiuliulin. Either way, Dennis, just call him Dennis, is stepping in for Cesar Almeida on short notice, making the trip down, and it's going to be a fun 185 matchup. And anytime you go out there and you watch Dennis tapes, the same thing every time. On the feet, he looks decently promising. A ton of power in his hands, lacks volume, lacks the best technicality, but he has fight-ending potential on the feet. But aside from that, man, not the best metrics, especially on the ground. He can be taken down, he can be controlled, he can be submitted. And that's been the story for 3 of his 4 UFC bouts. I mean, the one win he does have, he was able to stand with Jamie Pick and get a finish there, but taken down and finished by Kizriev, taken down and finished by Park, and taken down and finished by Rodriguez, all pretty early on. That's his big downfall. And luckily for him, he has himself a primary striker in front of him. Someone in Christian Leroy Duncan, who I do think is going to be the better technical striker, but someone who allows Dennis to get off on his game plan and strike with him. Now, Christian is someone who does have a ton of technicality, a ton of power as well. Maybe lacks volume a bit on the feet, and he was kind of outpointed in his last matchup because of that, but a good ability to make reads and land with fighting potential. He himself has a lot of power. I do think he is the more athletic and the more well-versed of the two. He doesn't typically go for takedowns, but I do trust him to have that ground game in his back pocket, and for that reason, I do believe he should be the favorite here. Not only is he going to be the one preparing for a matchup and not taking this one on short notice, but he does have the ground game advantage, shall it go there. And even on the feet, I do think he has just as much power as Dennis, and someone who's able to make the reads as the fight goes on from all levels. I love the aggression from Duncan. He is someone who I'm looking at back in this spot here. Now, at time of filming, the opening line for Christian Leroy Duncan is -400, and large price tag, but something that I do think he could cover if he goes follows his game plans. Either way, that's going to make him a very attractive target at 8.5K on DraftKings. Because he was a closer favorite against Almeida, he's in this mid-range, and when you're a -400 but 8.5K, that's going to attract a lot of ownership, and I have to agree. He has takedown and fight winning potential from that regard, but also has a ton of power on his feet. He does have a ton of upside at this 8.5K price range, and he is someone I'm going to be looking to target in a lot of these matchups. Getting to the money line, maybe not so much, because if he doesn't grapple in a striking affair, it could be close, but I do think he's going to have the optics with the pressure, more ability to mix it up on the feet, and have that ground game in his back pocket. Either way, Dennis isn't someone who I rate too highly. He can get those knockouts against the Jamie Pickett's and the regional scene people of the world, but in these prolonged MMA bouts that involve grappling, that involve volume, he's not going to succeed too much of the time, and I do think Leroy Duncan takes over. He is a good DraftKings piece, and he is someone who I see wins this fight more often than not. Next up, we have the 8-3 Lucas Alexander taking on the 13-3 Jeka Seragih in what is, to put it nicely, a lower level UFC matchup here. And to represent that, we have someone in Lucas Alexander who I do not rate too highly as a -550 favorite right now. And I guess when you look at hindsight, how they performed in their recent bouts, kind of makes sense, right? Lucas Alexander pulled off a credentialed win last time. He outstruck a UFC vet to a decision win, whereas Jeka Seragih was just dismantled and pieced apart by Angelo Jubilee, who we just saw is not UFC caliber either. So 2 guys on different career trajectories, but when we break this down, we have 2 guys whose biggest holes have been their ground games, and 2 guys who want to strike. And we look at the style of the two, you have the technical, good footwork, good ability to mix it up in Lucas Alexander versus the power threat in Jeka Seragih, who is more of a primary boxer, but also someone who just has the ability to rely on his power. Not the most technicality, not the most minute winning. He's a KO shot or bust a lot of the time, whereas Lucas Alexander is a war of attrition, more technicality on the upside to win these fights as the fight goes on. And for that reason, sure, I guess a big favorite is warranted on Lucas Alexander because we saw him win. We saw him have the ability to go out there, and if he's not being shot takedowns on, he usually wins these fights. Because if it goes to the mat, he's been submitted in his losses. He is not the best grappler. He doesn't like to be taken down there. But on the feet, he is very comfortable, and looks like Jeka Seragih is going to give that game plan. But considering the level that I think Lucas Alexander is here in this spot, I don't think he deserves to be this high of a price tag. And instead, maybe the value lays on Seragih, right? He is someone who does have a lot of power. I do think if Jekka wins, it's going to come with these KO shots, which aren't impossible. I guess it's also hard to rely on them from that regard as well. But I do think he does have that knockout power to potentially sway the odds. All that's to say is the pick is going to be Lucas Alexander, but I don't think this line should be that wide. And on DraftKings, I'm not the biggest fan of Lucas Alexander at 9.3. He put up 75 last time against Peterson, and I guess there is the ability for him to melt Jekka and get a finish as the fight goes on, but without much grappling upside, without much not one-shot knockout power, he is someone who's going to need an early finish, and against Jekka, he's more of a guy who's been finished as the fight goes on. I do think we have ourselves a war, one where Lucas prefers to stay on the outside, Jekka looks for that power shot a lot of the time. That doesn't necessarily score that well, and instead, if you're looking for a punt play on DraftKings, Jekka may be that guy at 6.9K. When he wins fights, are typically by knockout, and I think he's going to need that Hail Mary shot to win here. Aside from that, though, do not want too much involvement on this one. Pretty low level affair. The pick is Lucas Alexander, but the DraftKings value is on Jekka Seragih. Next up, we have the 13-5 Charles Johnson versus the 11-0 Rafael Estevam. We have ourselves a classic UFC vet, a guy who's proven versus his debutant from Dana White Contender Series, this undefeated prospect out of Brazil, and Estevam, who has passed the eye test so far, having this 11-0 record, 4 wins by KO, 3 by sub, 4 by decision. He seems to have the overall skill set. On paper, this looks like one where you have a prospect they're looking to shine, right? Undefeated, 7 wins by finish, facing a guy in Charles Johnson who's more of a decision machine, who has dropped a couple of his last few. Estevam might look legit in this spot, and people have been waiting for him to make his debut, but I do think that to open him the favorite here is maybe a bit too much too soon, and that's going to really show you what side I'm on here, because I do think this line is maybe flipped the wrong way here. I'm going to be picking Charles Johnson in this one, and that's coming from me, a guy who's not the biggest Charles Johnson fan, but I do think he has tools in this matchup that can help him win as the fight goes on. The biggest issue with Johnson is that takedown defense, right? Only 54%, was taken down 12 times by Muhammad Mokaev, 11 times by Cody Durden. He can be taken down. That really dampens his overall skill set, because on the feet, he is a very competent striker, and he is someone who can go out there with insane cardio, insane durability, and have a fun fight. But he can be taken down so often, it really dampens his skill set. Now, get-up game's perfect. Submission defense is amazing, but when he can be taken down so often, it kind of hurts him in the optics of the judges' scorecards. On the feet, though, this is a matchup where I do think he reigns supreme. Estevam's striking doesn't really blow me away. I do think that there are holes in his striking game. He can be hit. All of this is really to set up his takedowns, and while he is a very, very good grappler, we saw time and time again that Johnson's not someone that's easy to control and not someone that's easy to submit. So if you're going to allow Johnson to get up and be the fresher fight around 2 and 3, he does have better cardio. And Estevam's someone who, although he's getting these wins, his cardio doesn't look great, and neither does his striking. So unless he's able to go out there and wrestle and hold on to Estevam for 15 minutes, the same way Mokaev and Durden did, I don't think he wins his fight too often. So sure, there is a world where he's able to do that, but without having the cardio to prove it, or really fighting at this UFC level for a serious amount of time, I think that this step up may be a little bit too much too soon, considering the cardio and striking that Johnson brings to the table. So at the end of the day, although Estevam is the better grappler and someone who is going to be able to get his takedowns here against someone who's taken down so often as Johnson, if he's not able to get that finish, which we've never really seen Johnson finish on the ground, Johnson's got the better striking, better cardio to take over as this fight goes on. And really, the more this fight goes on, the better Johnson will look. So for that regard, I'm going to pick Johnson here, and I might be betting him at an underdog price tag. DraftKings, though, a lot of this goes out the window, right? Because although Charles Johnson's someone I'm picking, in his decision wins, he's scoring 82. If he would have won against Osborne, he would have scored 64. He doesn't have any grappling upside. Very rarely does he have finish upside. He is more of a decision striking machine that does not score well on DraftKings. Instead, for that regard, Estevam may be the higher priority on DraftKings just because his path to victory is probably rooted in grappling or even a finish here to score well. I do think that if he's able to go out there and win this fight, it's going to come with a high score, meaning he does have the better correlated DraftKings score. So with that being said, the pick is Charles Johnson. He is someone I'm looking to bet, but if I had to force one of these guys in my lineups, the person with the higher ceiling this weekend is going to be Rafael Estevam, and for that reason, he does have more upside. He is someone I'm looking to target more often, whereas Johnson is more of a betting and pick kind of thing. Let's go from one Johnson to another here as we go to the 15-8 Jose Johnson versus the 12-6 Chad Anheliger, the Canadian, someone who has been able to defy expectations before and someone who is coming in as another underdog this week. Both these guys are struggling. I mean, Anheliger dropped his last one, whereas Jose Johnson has dropped his only couple in the UFC. including being put in a twister last time by Damon Blackshear. But look at get these guys back on track, and I do think they're better than their record indicates. Johnson does have a pretty big frame. I mean, he has the ability to use that range. Very solid striker. I think he's able to utilize it there. Decent power and decent ability to win minutes in that regard. But I don't like his defensive tendencies. He can be overzealous in the grappling, which have cost him before. He can be even too aggressive in the striking, which has leave his chin to be caught in certain positions before. He is so aggressive in that offense, his defense lacks because of it. And when you're going up against someone with the power of Chad Anheliger, that's not necessarily the style you want to have. Chad is 37, maybe not the best point of his career, but someone who I do think has the savviness and the power to go out there and test someone, whether it be with their defensive mistakes, whether it be mixing up takedowns. I do think Chad Anheliger has the ability to go out there and mix up a fight, and considering how durable and how aggressive I've seen him be, he is someone who I kind of want to back at an underdog price tag. Now, as much as I'm saying that, the odds are kind of stacked against him here, right? Younger fighter with a longer frame and just as much power as Jose Johnson doesn't always bode too well. But when Jose Johnson is a primary striker who leaves himself in vulnerable positions, Chad Anheliger is someone who can utilize that power, utilize that pressure, maybe even mix in takedowns to go out there and have some success. Now, yes, it's usually Chad being the guy taken down, but these are very different opponents, and I do think the guy in front of him here is going to bring a whole different stylistic matchup, one where Chad can utilize his well-rounded skill set, his vet savviness, and go out there and potentially have some success. Either way, I think this is a very, very close fight. I do not fault anybody for taking the Jose Johnson side, considering he does have that length and that youth and that offensive prowess to go out there and have some success. But would I be playing Jose Johnson and his skill set at minus 180, minus 175, even minus 200 in some places? Definitely not. I do think he can be caught with his overzealous positioning. I do think he can be grappled against almost anybody. And I do think his defensive ability leaves a lot to be desired, making me not really want to back him as a larger favorite in this spot here. So maybe I'll take the dog here in Chad. I think this is one where it's kind of up in the air, and if you're going to give me plus money, maybe I'll take the shot in the Canadian to be able to cheer for them here, but very close fight, and one that I don't think is necessarily the best option for DraftKings either. Anheliger has never been KO'd, so although that striking offense is there for Johnson, I don't necessarily see his ceiling being as high with someone as durable as Chad in front of him, whereas although Anheliger does have that power and that forward pressure, he doesn't necessarily score the best on DraftKings. I mean, even in his one win against Strader, 99 points, that's pretty good, but that's with a third-round KO and 2 knockdowns. Do we expect that to get him here? Maybe. We have seen Jose Johnson knocked out before, but there are some better underdogs. I do lean towards Anheliger at 7.5K because, like I said, underdog who I think is live and who does have knockout power, but I think there may be better plays in the slate. Johnson at 8.7 doesn't really intrigue me all too much because he has a guy who is as tough as Chad in front of him, and he's in the same range as Perez, Hooper, Duncan, Pearce. I'm not getting to him as often. So give me the dog shot in Anheliger, maybe a little bit of Canadian bias. Don't fault anyone either way. However, I do think this is a very, very close, lower level fight, one where I don't think Johnson should be favored to this much of an extent. And then with one of my personal favorite fights of the night, we have the 14-4 Jonathan Pearce versus the 15-3-1 Joe Anderson Brito. Just an incredible clash, right? Jonathan Pearce, one of my favorite fighters, just because he has such an aggressive style. Kind of that Merab Dvalishvili, right? Takedown, takedown, takedown. A ton of pressure, very good cardio. He looks to break you down the stretch. And with 5 wins in a row, people are kind of seeing that recently, right? The reason why people like myself like him so much is because this is DraftKings gold, right? With all these takedowns landing 2, 4, 6, 6, 5 in his last 5 fights, those are great numbers. He put up 104 against Elkins, 145 against Amirkhani, 123 against Morales, 134 against Kamaka. Pearce has the ability to score very, very well. But he's getting, in my eyes, his biggest test to date when he faces someone like Joe Anderson Brito, who is as dangerous as he is. That just makes for an extremely interesting matchup here. It's going to be that pressure, that takedown offense of someone like Jonathan Pearce versus the finishing upside of Brito. I do think Pearce can be able to win the minutes with the takedown upside, with that aggressiveness. But when it comes down to being the more dangerous fighter, rarely are people going to be a more dangerous fighter than Joe Anderson Brito. I mean, a ton of power in his hands, as he's been able to get back-to-back first-round finishes here, and to go along with that, a black belt jiu-jitsu, a guy who does have a phenomenal game on the ground, a phenomenal amount of power on the feet as well. He is a super fun fighter to watch. Now, with all that power and that well-rounded skill set there are his flaws. I do think he can be out-volumed. I do think that his cardio is still in question just because of how much power he puts into every shot. But there's no denying this guy is extremely dangerous. Whereas you have a guy in Pearce who maybe is less dangerous, but brings such a high pace to the octagon, that cardio is going to be tested at Brito. And I think for that reason, this is one of my favorite fights started on DraftKings, but also one of the hardest fights for me to call. I love Pearce. I love his style. I love his takedown-oriented approach to go out there and score very well on DraftKings, but I've seen Pearce rocked. I've seen him put in submission positions and precarious situations in that regard. I think he's getting an extremely dangerous opponent in front of him, and if he continues to try to use that I'm going to run through you mentality, he may be caught here. And I do think that the more potent finisher is going to be Joannis Brito. For that reason, I might be slightly leaning towards him. I truly do believe this is a 50-50 fight. The minute winning, the grappling of Pearce versus the finish upside of Brito. I'm not sure, man, because on the feet, I do think Brito is the more technical, more powerful striker. Whereas if Pearce gets sloppy with his takedown the same way he did against Rodriguez, Brito can definitely put him into precarious situations. So I'm actually slightly leaning towards the underdog here in Joannis Brito. I think his finishing upside is no joke, and I do think he is a legit prospect to cause problems for someone like Jonathan Pearce. However, I do think that the winner of this matchup scores incredibly well from both sides, whether it be the takedown and the decision equity for someone like Pearce or the finish upside of someone like Brito. So for that reason, I'm forcing this fight into my lineups. One of my favorite fights from DraftKings. I love it from an entertaining perspective as well. And I don't know if I'll get there from a betting perspective, but one that is just extremely intriguing and I'm very much looking forward to. We continue with the 7-0 Mick Parkin versus the 8-1-1 Kyle Machado. Machado making his return to the cage after a lackluster Dynamite Tennis Series performance. You know what, man? Fighting out of Canada, I was cheering for him for sure. I bet on him and I'm happy he won, but that was one of the worst Dynamite Tennis Series we've seen. And that's not really because of Machado, it's because of Kevin Saflarski, the guy he fought. And it really kind of leaves a sour taste in his mouth. And now to show for it, he's coming in as a massive underdog against a guy, Mick Parkin, who has really exceeded expectations. And I think this is another really, really fun heavyweight matchup, but another one that's kind of fun to break down, right? You have the one side of things, you have the more technical of the two in Parkin, a guy who showed he's able to compete for 15 minutes, utilize his volume, his power, his ground game. He seems to be making some good improvements, and he did that as an underdog against Jamal Pogue, scoring well in that decision last time. And he's facing a guy, Machado, who's kind of a different guy here, right? A ton of power. Everything he does is power. Looking to get a finish, black belt on the feet, black belt on the mat as well. He has the ability to finish you from all regards, and I do think he is extremely dangerous, but there are some red flags. I mean, he was being pieced up by an older man on tape there in the Canadian regional scene, low level of competition, as well as questionable cardio. And I do think when it comes down to comparing the two, I think Kyle Machado is probably the more dangerous of the two, but he hasn't fought anybody, relatively unproven. Cardio is also unproven. And when it comes to technicality on the feet, I think it's Mick Parkin all day. So for that reason, I kind of agree with the Mick Parkin being the favorite. Maybe it is too wide considering of the finish upside Machado may have, being able to clip someone like Parkin, but I do think when it comes down to technicality and minute winning ability and path to victory, it all goes towards the Englishman here in Parkin, and I do think he's a rightful favorite. But as a low-level heavyweight fight with a lot of variance, another good fight to target on DraftKings. I mean, Parkin is more expensive, 9.2K. I get why, right? A ton of power, expected to go out there and do well, facing someone who does gas out. I do think his ceiling is higher than his last bout where he only scored 70. Whereas Machado, on the flip side of things, you have to assume if his cardio is as poor and if he's going in there with such finish upside, he's round one or bust, maybe round one or two or bust here, and I don't think it's impossible, but at 7K, that is going to score very, very well. I have seen him be very, very dangerous, and although he is unproven, 6 of 8 wins at the first round seems pretty good to me. That is a lot of upside. Ability to clip anybody, good ability to win the mat as well. This fight seems like it could rate out well on DraftKings, and although it may be a low-level bout, one where I'm picking Mick Parkin, but both sides are viable from a DFS perspective. Keep it going with the 14-8 Lucy Pudilova versus the 8-2 Aline Perez. Perez out here shaking ass after she wins these fights. Doing well, though. It's going very well, and I was very bullish on her last time out. Scored 138 against Evan Smith is one of my higher owned targets, and you know what? I'm a fan of her. Not for the dancing or anything, but I do think she has a fun style, right? Going out there, constant aggression. She was able to land 10 takedowns last time against Evan Smith. A ton of aggression, decent power on the feet, and someone who, although is very raw, against these low-level competition, she seems like she wants it, right? She wants to go out there and win these fights. She wants to bring a pace, bring a pressure, and has the ability to be a very violent, dominant person looking for the finish. Now, she faces someone in Pudilova who is in her second stint in the UFC, and someone who, you know, may have lost her last 5 out of 6, but someone who has shown improvements, right? First fight back against Yanan, second round knockout, looked very well in doing so. And even her last one against Edwards, man, I'm telling you, rewatch that one, she won that fight. So now she comes in here, could be on a 2-fight win streak against someone who is as unproven as Aline Perez. Could she be ready to give her a vet lesson? That's really kind of where it's going to. And I'm kind of leaning towards no, right? Like, I do think that Pudilova is someone who's making the right improvements, who should be on a 2-fight winning streak, but I like Perez, man. I like her ability to be aggressive, utilize that pressure and a ton of takedowns, right? Being able to put Lucy on her back foot, be able to take her down and implement her ground and pound style, her always looking for the finish. Pudilova only has a 63% takedown defense, has been taken down and submitted by some lesser competition, including Antonina Shevchenko and others in her previous bouts. And I do think she is someone who has these flaws in the mat. And even on the feet, I do think her striking is subpar and something that I don't think she'll necessarily excel too much against someone like Perez. So when it comes down to me seeing Perez as the aggressor, the one with the ability to land takedowns and has the ability to put a pace on someone like Pudilova, I'm going to go with Perez here. Again, another lower level bout, but considering all the takedown upside of the aggression and how much I think Perez wants it, her pace, her style could bode very well for her in the future. I do think she's going to have a strength advantage here in the ability to cover Pudilova and win this matchup. DraftKings-wise, though, very sneaky option for Perez at 8.6. In her last one, like I said, 138 in a win. I don't expect her to get that much, but I do think she has the ability to go out there and has a ton of takedown success. And her style, she's always looking for a finish. Super aggressive in that regard as well. I do like her at 8.6K. Takedown, pace, pressure is always on the table for her, which will score very well. She's someone I'm liking this week on DraftKings, and although it is a lower level bout, I do have confidence with playing her in my lineups. Keep it going with the 13-5 Nicholas Motta versus the 16-6 Trey Ogden. Keep this one shorter, right? Because it's a pretty simple breakdown. I'm not that high on Trey Ogden. Never have been. I think he lacks finishing upside. And although he has the ability to go out there and win minutes and win decisions that way, never knocked anybody out. Very slow, plodding style from that regard. And he can beat this low level of competition, but I don't think his style is necessarily too much I want to get behind. Nicholas Motta also has flaws. I think Nicholas Motta is the far superior technical fighter of the two, but I mean, he can be knocked out, he can be hit, and that defense and that durability is definitely a concern for Motta. Because I do think he's a decent prospect. But being knocked out in round 2 by Miller, out cold, being knocked out by a vicious elbow last time by Torres, not something you put too much stock into, but something where we have to note that durability. So it comes down to a guy who is always finishing his losses versus a guy who never had any finished losses. Who prevails, and I'm going to have to go with Nicholas Motta here. I do think he's going to land the much more powerful shots here. Ogden is pretty durable, but Motta's power, technicality, and ability to mix it up from all levels is something that I like to see. Ogden's style necessarily doesn't win too many minutes either. He's plodding from the outside pitter-patter without landing as much impact and good visions from that regard. Motta's got the opportunity to do that. So, in my eyes, whenever I'm going out there and I'm looking to bet against Motta, can his opponent knock him out? Sure, Ogden can knock him out. I just don't think it's too likely. And for that regard, when we have such a closely lined fight, I will take the shot here on Motta. I do think he's better. Ton of power in his hand, better optics, decent cardio and volume as well, and I do think he's able to take over minutes-wise. I don't know if he gets the finishes, but either way, I do think he's someone I can rely on more often. The knockout shot's always there for Trey. He could get it, but I do think that implication is a lower percentage. Let me side with Motta here. DraftKings-wise, every time Motta fights, it kind of looks like it's one you kind of got to have, right? A ton of variance, a ton of power. All these fights seem to end by knockout, but with Ogden, it's the opposite. Scored 64 against Huber, limited Bahamondes and Leavitt to lower scores as well. Like, he isn't someone who I think brings a very heavy pace, and although Motta does, it leaves it so that Ogden necessarily doesn't attract you too much on DraftKings. And for that reason, not necessarily my highest owned target, but if you're looking from a contrarian point of view, right? Motta loses by knockout. Ogden's path to victory seems to be rooted in that knockout. Can you get it? Potentially. This is more of a contrarian play. When it comes down to my single entry lineups, I much prefer the Pearces, the Perez's, the Duncans, the people around Motta that could go out there and score a lot higher. Fun fight. Hopefully, I'm going to pick Motta here. Now this next one is one that's, according to Tapology, an unconfirmed rumor. I hope it's confirmed because I did my research and I tried to pronounce this guy's name properly. We have the 9-1 Euros Medic versus the 11-1. Stay with me. Mick Tebek Orolbai. Let's call him Mick. Mick here, no, not to be confused with Mick Parkin. Let's go with Beck. Yeah, let's go with Beck. Beck is someone who I will admit I was not really familiar with. He is someone who I didn't really know too often. Did the research though, and he passes the eye test, man. You go out there, you watch the performances, a ton of power. 10 of his 11 wins coming by finish, and including one that was just a few weeks ago. I mean, he was just out here fighting LFA. Good for him for taking this spot on short notice, and that is something we are going to touch on. But when it comes to looking at his overall skill set, I do think he belongs here. Decent level of competition with only loss coming in ACA as well. He seems to be very, very well-rounded and have a decent ground game to go out there, have success, and some competent strike in the feet as well. Either way, this guy seems to pass the eye test, and what it comes down to is he's getting the short notice affair. We don't know how this is going to bode for him. Euros Medic, I do think this guy has power. Of course, it's nice to see him improving and get that knockout win over Semmelsberger, but I do think this man has holes, man. He has never been to the judges' scorecard, which means his cardio is definitely in question, as well as even his durability, considering his one loss has come by finish. Again, it was a Jalen Turner, not going to put too much behind him, but we have a guy in front of him who's never been to the judges' scorecards, whose cardio is definitely in question, whose takedown defense is definitely in question, someone who can be controlled the mat. All those things really come together to have, we have this guy Medic who is a pure power puncher, who is definitely improving, who does have a lot of power in his hands, but is he going to be able to put up with this all-rounded attack from someone like back here who, although he's coming in on short notice, seems to have this well-rounded skill set and seems to be pretty dangerous when he does get it down there. And although I've picked against Medic and Field recently, and although he is the guy who is going to be on the full camp, I got to go with the short notice guy here, considering he does have that well-rounded skill set, and I think he has more paths to getting it done. I think on the feet, it is very close. We've seen Medic rocked, and I do think Beck has the ability to go out there and counter and land something clean, but on the mat, there's no comparison. And I do think Beck is going to be the superior grappler, even with the guy who I've seen proven go to that third round, go to that decision, have success there. So for that regard, more paths, more reason to go out there and trust Beck, which is kind of ironic considering he is the guy on short notice making his debut. But I do like what I see. Did not expect to see all that stuff. And he is someone who I think I'm going to pick in this matchup. DraftKings-wise, where it gets interesting though, because Medic's 8.9K. He's currently an underdog right now in the betting line. I don't think he's going to be too popular, and for that reason, I'm going to stay away from him. I expect a lot of people to. Very, very low owned. I don't know where Beck's going to slide in. You have to assume it's higher up, whether it be in the 8.7 where his actual line is, or if they do it relative to Medic's price tag, I don't know. But with that ground game upside, with the fact that Medic's never been to the scorecards, his upside's very good as well. I'll be looking to target him if he's with a reasonable price. Either way, super fun fight. I was impressed with what I see from back here, and I do think he belongs in the UFC. Excited to see how he shows out. We continue in the main card with the 11-4 Amanda Ribas versus the 11-1 Luana Pinheiro. Simple fight, right? Ribas back at 115. Does her chin hold up? That's really all I'm saying for this matchup, because I think when it comes down to skill, I think Ribas is better than Pinheiro. I think she's the better overall minute winner, better volume on the feet, just as competent on the ground, maybe even better in the grappling. Against someone in Pinheiro who has a ton of power, and yes, you could knock out Amanda Ribas at any time, but lacks minute winning ability. Cardio is definitely in question, who has fought low level of competition. So when it comes to me saying who should be favored and who I'm picking to win, it's Amanda Ribas, because I do think she has the minute winning equity, and I see her winning this fight more often. When it comes to finish upside, though, it's Pinheiro. We've seen Ribas knocked out, definitely not the best look, and I do think Pinheiro has that upside. Either way, it is a smaller percentage outcome than I do think Ribas winning a decision here. So for that regard, give me Ribas to not only take over late, but to win this matchup, to potentially score well in doing so, and it is just someone to be picking here with decent confidence. However, that knockout is always live for Pinheiro against someone Ribas, but I do think at 115 she's able to fare better here. Give me Ribas. DraftKings-wise, another very complicated one. I just said Ribas can have success, and we've seen her have 115-point wins, 100-point wins, 105. She does have decent upside, but when you're at 9K around people like Morales and Parkin and in a card with we just talked about how stacked this mid-range is with Duncan and Perez and Pearce, I'm not getting to her as often. And I do think she can have success, but maybe it's actually Pinheiro who has more DraftKings viability. Considering 7.2K, if she wins, it's probably going to come by finish. She's a ton of power, and that's really seen how Ribas has lost fights. And considering how the cardio falls off a cliff, I do think the win condition for Pinheiro scores well in that knockout win. However, again, like I said, small percentage opportunity for that reason. Not a fight I'm getting to too often. Such a loaded card. On another one, maybe I'll get to her, but the pick is Ribas. I do think aside from that finish loss, she does able to come through here. And with the UFC debutant Peyton Talbott 6-0 versus the 7-1 Nick Aguirre. Fights in the main card for one reason only, and that is because of Peyton and Talbott, the biggest favorite on the card. Minus 800 right now, and you get it, right? His last performance was absolutely incredible, and he's getting fed someone who is not. Right, with all due respect, he can beat me up. I know Nick can, but Talbot looked great. And there's only one reason it's on the main card. It's not because of Nick Aguirre. It's because Talbot is a guy they can market. Talbot is a guy who has been super fun to watch, great on the mic. He's looked great. And in this matchup here, I think it bodes pretty well for him. Peyton Talbot is someone who has his flaws, no doubt. And I actually picked against him on Dynamite Contender Series, and one day I'll bet against him here again too. But in all these matchups, we've shown that he can take a punch, continue to walk forward, and that overwhelming pressure and volume and striking accuracy is incredible. I mean, he looked great last time out, breaking him down the stretch, and it was fun to watch. And I do think he's able to do that again here against someone like Nick Aguirre, but man, Talbot's got to shore up that striking defense. He can be hit, he can be taken down. Although he's been super resilient, ability to work back to his feet, he's got holes. And the people who can take him down are going to get a lot of success, and one day it'll come against him. I'm still picking Talbot here because he is so dynamic and offensively oriented on the feet, but one day, man. This line may be a bit wide, so maybe if the line continues to inflate, I'll take the shot on Nick Aguirre because I do think his overall skill set isn't horrible. Very, very solid grappler. He's going to struggle a lot in the feet, especially in this matchup here, but I do think he's able to have some grappling success. Primary wrestler who was able to contend there against Argueta, and I do think he's able to have some success in transitions. But when you have a guy here in Aguirre who his primary base is that wrestling, but whose striking isn't great, whose cardio isn't great, if you see someone in Peyton Talbot, it's not necessarily what you want to see, right? Talbot's going to have the ability to wear as this fight goes on, incredible pressure, ability to mix it up to the body. I think Talbott gets a late finish. And that's not just me saying that. The lines have been nuked all over the place. He defends takedowns, gets right back up, puts on such a heavy pace that his opponents wilt and aren't able to shoot anymore, and I kind of think that's what happens here. Aguirre probably going to have some success with takedowns round one, but if he cannot control or get Talbott out of there, Talbot's going to take over, Talbot's going to dominate. For that reason, that is why he is such a big favorite. DraftKings-wise, 9.5K, big price tag, especially for someone who is most likely to get a second or third round knockout. I get why you want to play him. I'll have some ownership of him due to his volume upside and his ability to get a finish as the fight goes on, but I'd rather have an Allen or I'd rather have a Parkin here. So people who have this round one knockout upside, who are even cheaper than he is, I might fade him to be a bit different, but there's no debate that he is someone who is going to be in your player pool, considering he's minus 800 to win the fight, considering he does have late finish upside. He is someone you're going to look towards. So, end of the day, late finish for Talbot is what I'm predicting. Decent stylistic matchup in front of them, although he's going to have to shore up that takedown defense if he's going to look to have success down the road. And then the people's main event, the 11-2 Jordan Leavitt versus the 12-3-1 Chase Hooper. Two guys who are just pure grapplers. Who prevails? I don't know, man. I'm having fun with this one, and it's so surprising to see Chase Hooper such a big price tag. I know he's had success. I know he's used that cardio to his advantage, and that's kind of what this one comes down to, right? Is I think that at cardio parity, at size parity too, even though they're similar, I might even pick Leavitt. I think Leavitt is the overall better wrestler. I think even on the feet, Leavitt has shown he's smart enough to know what to do to win these fights. Like kick Trey Ogden for 3 rounds, fine, he can do that. I just think overall this line is a bit disrespectful for someone who has shown he has the ability to mix it up and win fights other ways like Leavitt does. But at the end of the day, if you're telling me this fight's in round 3 and Chase Hooper's continuing pressing forward with all his volume, I can see why he's the favorite, right? Leavitt has been shown to slow down in those later rounds. Hooper has shown an incredible pace, and although he's out there dropping these early rounds to fighters he shouldn't be, he pulls it off because he is so aggressive, throws a ton of volume, and looks to break his opponents down the stretch. I think he's going to potentially be able to do that here against Leavitt, although it will not be pretty early on. I don't see Hooper submitting Leavitt early. I think Leavitt is a very, very smart fundamental grappler on the mat, and I do think the stronger of the two when it comes to wrestling is probably the Monkey King here as well. So I do think I might, the more I talk about it, I'm leaning towards Leavitt here, considering he has the ability to mix it up from either way, but that cardio is killer for Hooper. The ability to break him down the stretch, I do think is there. So maybe I'll pick Leavitt, but all I know is that if I have to, live bet Chase Hooper will be there. The more I think about it, man, we saw Hooper lose to Peterson, almost lose to Barrett there, lose to Caceres. Like, he has the ability to lose minutes if he's not able to dominate on the ground, and I don't think he's able to dominate early. And I think when it comes to the feet, Leavitt is smart enough to not only defend the takedowns, maybe even get some of his own, but win minutes. And he's shown he's able to do that. I think I'm going to pick Jordan Leavitt, although if you're the one tracking my pick, you know who you are. Love you, Brian. I'm still on the fence about this one. 50-50 to me, so if it's 50-50, let's take the dog here in Leavitt. Again, like I said, live bet Hooper if you're willing to. To me, there's 2 ways it can go. I do think it goes over, and if it does go over, it's going to be either the cardio of Hooper coming back and rallying to get a late finish, or Leavitt just cruising towards a decision. So it kind of sounds like the comeback win's more fun to cheer for, but I got to go with my reads here, and that is Jordan Leavitt. DraftKings-wise, Hooper has been an absolute dark horse. I mean, 120 against Fiora, 142 against Colares, 112 against Tamor. He has the ability to put up very big scores, but if he doesn't get his grappling off, and he could potentially be stifled by someone like Jordan Leavitt, maybe there's other people I'll go to, but there's no doubt that he's going to be someone in my player pool as well. Volume, history, cardio upside is something I'm definitely looking to back on. And the flip side of things, underdog and Jordan Leavitt also very viable this week. 78 and 86 against Sales when he's able to go out there and mix up his attack. In his knockout wins, he's able to score over 100, but don't necessarily know if he's getting there here. 7.4K, though, he doesn't need too much to be optimal. If you're looking for underdog, I do think he's able to survive the first 2 rounds for sure and potentially get a decision win, making him pretty viable here. Either way, a fight I'm looking to target and a fight I'm looking forward to. Pre-flop, pick is going to be Leavitt. Live bet Hooper if he's still going strong in round 3. Fun matchup. And then the 15-0 Michael Morales versus the 19-6 Jake Matthews. Another really fun fight to be put in our co-main. You have the young undefeated prospect and someone like Morales. Very well-rounded. The ability to mix it up on the ground. 11 of his 15 wins coming by knockout. He has shown that he's a true threat. Very good athleticism, good movement as well. He has passed the eye test. And I do think when it comes to the striking of it all and the athleticism, he is a true threat. Have we seen him against elite grapplers or people who are able to test his overall skill set? Not yet, but his power is there, his volume is there, and athleticism is definitely there as well. He's being someone in Matthews who's been really up and down in the UFC, right? Dominated Fiallo, lost is a big favorite to Selmsberger. Dominated Flowers, let's see how he does here, because he's definitely been up and down from a bunch of regards. Nonetheless, though, an absolute vet, right? Has fought against a lot of people. Put on vet lessons, has shown the ability to perform and sometimes not. He's been very up and down, but all we know is that this guy is also very well-rounded, ton of power, very good striking accuracy, good ability to mix it up in the ground as well. He averages 1.71 takedowns for 15 minutes. And with that black belt there, he is someone who is going to have some success on the mat, being able to contend down there. But I think when it comes over to picking this matchup, who's going to have more success here, I do think that the striking offense is potentially there for Jake Matthews. But the guy with more athleticism, the guy with more power, and I think the guy with more paths of victory here is going to be Michael Morales, and I do think he has him covered. Morales has shown nothing but good success being able to contend in all areas of MMA, and I do think he has the better power here, minute winning on the feet to have success. Even with the takedown upside of Matthews, I do think Morales is able to stop the takedowns and wins from that regard, making him a very viable favorite. I agree with the line. I do think he should win here. He is my pick. DraftKings wise, just because he is so powerful, he has that knockout shot. 9.1K, I am looking to get some Morales in there for sure. He is my preferred side on DraftKings, especially considering how I see him winning a lot of the time here, in contrast to Matthews. But with such a packed card with a lot of first round finishes, if you want to get different towards what I think is going to be a pretty popular favorite this week, feel free to. However, I am still picking Morales. I do still think he gets it done. And then the main event, the 22-5 Brendan Allen versus the 17-6-1 Paul Craig. Extremely fun matchup, right? Two guys who are historically incredible grapplers whose chins haven't always held up. But you dig in deeper, Brendan Allen has been an absolute roll, right? Since losing to Sean Strickland, 5 straight wins, including 3 in a row by submission, has been incredibly impressive, whereas Paul Craig has been up and down. I mean, he is ever dangerous on the mat. There's no debate about that, but people have found out, keep it on the feet, knock his lights out, you have success, and has been pretty good for that. Now, with the second matchup down here at 185, his chin is only even more in question, right? And hell, the last time against Muniz, he was able to weather the storm, but Muniz isn't a power threat on the feet. He wanted to grapple as well. They grappled. Craig had success, and he could look good doing so because he is so physical here, but this is going to be an extremely fun matchup, right? Very heavy price tag on Brendan Allen, and I get it. He has been on a roll. I think he's the better striker of the two, fundamentally, and I do think Paul Craig's durability is still something to be concerned about, but Brendan Allen loves it on the mat. He's a very good grappler in his own right, and Paul Craig, too, wants it on the mat as well. I think when it comes down to picking a better grappler of the two, especially considering the size that Craig brings from 205, I think Craig could have some success on the mat, and I do think this line is way too wide from a betting perspective. Allen, of course, is the more trustworthy fighter, and the chin is definitely not something to be confident in, but when it comes down to the mat, the way these guys are able to scramble, I do think Craig is ever dangerous to catch Allen in something, making it fun in that regard. But at the end of the day, the guy with more paths to victory, the guys with more ability to get it done here is going to be Allen. He is going to be my pick, but incredible value in that regard on Paul Craig, and especially on DraftKings. 6.8K. If he wins this fight, he's going to score very, very well. Scored 104, 97, 103, 118, 91 in his last wins. He's a finisher bust type of guy typically, and he's never out of the fight. Brendan Allen himself has been in a roll, like I mentioned. He scored 118, 78, 107, 95 in his last 4 wins, scoring very well in the process, looking very impressive. Although he has lost these fights by knockout, he's only 1 loss by sub, and that was all the way back in 2016. We'll see how it holds out. Like I said, both these guys are extremely viable. I slightly picked Allen, but the line is wide. I want ownership to both these guys on DraftKings. It is expected to end inside the distance, and both these guys have their own paths to finishing this fight. Should be very fun. DraftKings scores are definitely up there as well. That's going to do it for me here on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. Quickly, let me run you through my quick picks. Taking Brendan Allen in a very close fight, Michael Morales, Jordan Leavitt in a 50-50, Peyton Talbott, Amanda Ribas, Mick Tebek, Orolbai, Nicholas Motta, Alain Perez, Mick Parkin, Joe Anderson Brito, Chad Anheliger, Charles Johnson, Lucas Alexander, and Christian Leroy Duncan. On DraftKings, this mid-range is phenomenal. If I had to pick some fights I could target the most, I really like Christian Leroy Duncan this week. Pearce versus Brito is one of my must-haves. Parkin Machado, Allen Craig, as well as some sneaky ownership on Chase Hooper versus Leavitt. If I want to break it down by category, up top, Peyton Talbott is fine to get to, but I do like the Allen, Parkin, and Morales range. Mid-range, I like Alain Perez, Chris Duncan, Pearce a ton. And underdogs, I love Brito. I love Leavitt. And I do think that high upside underdogs do rely in Craig, Seragih, and Machado this week. Reignmakers-wise, if I had to pick the fights with the highest ceilings this week, it's the winner of Allen Craig, the winner of Pearce Brito, and then Christian Leroy Duncan, Alain Perez, Mick Parkin, and the guy's name I can't pronounce. And then betting-wise, actually, I will not have any bets locked in until Saturday morning. I'm driving back home to Canada for the first time in like 8 months now to go see my family for American Thanksgiving. I'll be placing my bets there back in Canada because, we like our Canadian sports books up there. Be sure to be updated on my full betting slate early Saturday morning. Make sure to check that out. But for me here on YouTube, make sure to hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, show some love. Best bets video should be out later this week as well. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Let's make some money, guys.